Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, are you getting enough oxygen? Have you thought about that? Have you stopped breathing? I hope not. But how much oxygen do we need for our health? And is breathing enough? Well, we all know about those tubes that you can put in your nose and breathe oxygen if you're deficient, if you have a health need. But let's talk about getting more oxygen in more interesting ways that really advance our health. And to do that is a close friend who's been on Energy Stew many times, and he's one of the leading experts in the world about ozone. He's a well-known ozone doctor. And as a matter of fact, many doctors visit him for training. And so he's a real leader in the industry. And we want to know, what is this ozone all about? What is it? What does it do for us? And let's find answers from Dr. Howard Robins. Dr. Robins, okay, let me call you Howard. Welcome
You can call me anything but late for dinner.
Good.
And thank you very much once again, Peter, for having me on. It's interesting that people may not realize, or they will, you could live sometimes for months without food, particularly if you have a lot of storage food in your body, if you're overweight and whatnot. You can live for sometimes several weeks without water, but try to live for more than a minute or two without oxygen. It's kind of simple. Just hold your breath and see how long you can hold your breath for. And you'll find out not very long at all. Oxygen is actually the most important element that we need to stay alive.
When I was in my early 70s, I was very proud of myself because I was an active swimmer and I could still swim 50 meters underwater without coming up for a breath. And I never timed it, but I'm sure it was quite a long time.
Sure, it could be several minutes.
Yeah.
But after that, you have to come up for breath. And if you don't come up for breath, you're never coming up again.
At the 50-meter mark, I was so grateful to get up and breathe.
Well, that's the importance of oxygen to our bodies. Every cell of our body that's healthy, at least, has a little organelle, they call it, an organelle in the cell called mitochondria. And what the mitochondria do is it takes nutrients plus oxygen and it creates what they call ATPs, adenosine triphosphates, the energy molecule. And those energy molecules are utilized to, one, keep the cell alive longer, which in a sense slows the aging process down. And number two, make energy for the cell to do its job. Okay, whatever it is, a liver cell, a brain cell, a pancreas cell, a lung cell, a heart cell. So it does that. And then last but not least, it needs the energy to create another one of itself. And that's the importance. You cannot do these three things without the oxygen. It's that important. You could eat all the right foods, all the right supplements, absorb them perfectly, and without oxygen, they're worthless.
Well, what about just keeping breathing every day? I know that.
Well, that's the point of breathing is to extract oxygen from the air that we take in. And unfortunately, we live in a world where oxygen in the atmosphere in cities and whatnot has been depleted over the course of millennia. There was a time when 50,000 years ago, the claim was we had over 40% oxygen in every breath of air that we would take in. But because of pollution and all sorts of things that we've done to our environment, the best you're going to get And that's in a tropical rainforest that's pristine. Or if you happen to somehow float over blue-green algae, you'll get 21% oxygen. In cities today, we're lucky if we're getting as much as 15% or 16% oxygen
Well, one of
in
the
each breath.
I've been learning in the last, actually, I started hearing about it about 20 years ago, is that if we're breathing too deeply too often, we are breathing in so much oxygen and we don't have enough CO2 in our bodies. And we do need an ample amount of CO2 for the oxygen to be utilized the best it can. So there are breathing techniques that say breathe more shallow to allow yourself to have more CO2.
Well, it's the carbon dioxide building up in our body that triggers the lungs to take another breath. So if you don't have carbon dioxide, there's no reason to take another breath. Your lungs will just stop inhaling. So there's that balance that has to be created between CO2, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, O2. But what we do is we use O3, ozone, made from the oxygen
But when
in
you
our
say
bodies.
we, let's explain who we are.
Well, we are doctors and healthcare practitioners that have been trained in the use of ozone to use as a medicine. Ozone O3, we all know about ozone in the atmosphere. What people don't know is the ozone layer, which protects us against harmful ultraviolet rays from the sun, disappears every night when the sun goes down and reappears every morning as the sun comes up, and ultraviolet light cuts through the atmosphere where we have oxygen in the, high up in the atmosphere, breaks up the oxygen cell molecules, and then they combine again, temporarily that is, into O3 ozone. And this constantly is going on, the breaking down and the recombining during the daytime. And that's how we prevent extra ultraviolet rays from coming down and harming us.
Wow, very interesting.
And now, so ozone is actually very protective. On the other side of the coin, people have been concerned unfairly by pollution. And when in the sense that people have been concerned that ozone being created on ground level and being inhaled could be harmful and damaging. Well, the answer is yes and no. It can be damaging if you have lung problems, lung disease, lung issues, because inhalation of ozone, the lungs can't protect themselves against it because they can't produce what we call antioxidant enzymes fast enough. And if for those of you that are scientists out there, that's superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, glutathione reductase, and catalase. And that's why healthy cells produce that and can't be damaged by oxidation, such as an oxidant like ozone. But what happens is ozone is actually cleaning the air. It combines with these pollutants and it cleans the air. But it's not the ozone then that the people are inhaling that's causing potential lung damage. It's the combination of these pollutants that they're inhaling now that have been decontaminated by ozone. And that combination is what we're inhaling large amounts of on these ozone alert days, as they call them, and causing trouble. But that's environmental. What we do medically is, and we've learned this, and ozone is not new. That's another thing. Ozone therapy in medicine is not new. Just so people should understand, because it may sound very new to the listeners. Dr. Charles Kenworthy, president of the Florida State Medical Association, he was an MD, published a little book in 1885 called Ozone in Medicine. So even back as far as the 1800s.
And he's still alive now, right?
I don't think so. But back then he was using ozone in medicine, and ozone was used worldwide to treat medical problems up until the 1930s here in the USA. Why? Well, then the FDA came into being, and drugs, pharmaceuticals came into being. And now we, instead of using ozone to kill, as an antibiotic, for example, to kill harmful bacteria, we started using penicillin. And that was the beginning of the pharmaceutical era in this country. And that's when ozone kind of disappeared. Then,
Excuse me, how did they introduce ozone into the body 150 years ago?
well,
Years.
that's interesting. Mostly from what we can tell, some of it was intravenous. Some of it was intravenous. How they figured that out, what kind of needles they used, syringes, this is all that information has been lost because there was nobody interested in keeping it. But it was used intravenously and probably used we call insufflations, where the gas was injected rectally, vaginally, and whatnot, what we would call an ozone enema or an ozone douche today.
Not into the mouth.
No, because if you inhaled it directly, it could cause damage to your lungs. And the first medical, truly high quality medical ozone generator was created by Nikola Tesla in 1896.
Wow.
So prior to that, there were some ozone generators used to make and purify water. So I do believe that was started in the 1880s, so 1870s. So what I do believe was that ozonated water was probably being used to treat wounds, to be, for drinking, to treat stomach problems and things like that.
Well, let's explain why ozone can treat water and even wounds. What is it about the ozone that makes it so powerful?
Well, basically, and this is really what it comes down to, ozone lacks an electron. Everybody knows atoms, and atoms have nucleus and they have electrons in the running around them like planets around the sun. And if an atom is missing an electron, which is what ozone is, because oxygen O2 is very stable. But when you break it up with electricity or ultraviolet rays, it becomes unstable. And one of those O's, the extra O, can attach on to another oxygen molecule, but it doesn't want to be there. It wants to become stable again. So it looks for some virus, fungus, yeast, mold, bacteria, parasite, toxin, harmful free radical, harmful gas like carbon monoxide, and harmful free radical gases like carbon monoxide and whatnot. And what it does is it steals an electron from there and it becomes part of it. Either it destroys these harmful organisms, or it attaches to it and forms a compound that's safe. For example, carbon monoxide. So we're breathing it in all the time when you live in cities, cars are giving it off in exhaust. And CO, carbon monoxide, is a harmful gas. Now, when you combine it with O3, for chemistry people out there, you don't have to be too bright about this. What happens is one of the oxygen molecules attaches onto the carbon monoxide, and it becomes CO2.
Right.
And then O2 is the waste product, oxygen, which is actually very healthy. We need more oxygen. So now you've taken a harmful gas and created a neutral gas that won't harm you. Okay.
But also, when you said that, for instance, it takes an extra oxygen electron, or I think that was what you said, from a virus or something like that. And does that neutralize the virus?
Well, that's a little more complicated, and I'll explain. How about, let's use COVID, for example. Okay. So the COVID virus, people have seen pictures of what supposedly is the COVID virus, and it looks like a ball. And on the ball, there were these little nubs coming out, almost like what, if people know what dryer balls are, that you throw in your dryer to puff up your towels and your clothes when you're drying them, instead of using those harmful chemicals and stuff. Well, in any case, those little bumps that are coming out, that if you looked at them on some of these shows that they and on the internet, were two types of molecules. There was SH groups, sulfhydryl molecules, and tryptophan groups. People have heard of tryptophan before. You can take it as a supplement. But the way they're attached to that ball that you call the virus is with what they call a double bond. So if you put two fingers out, these double bonds are what attaches it. Now, what happens is, and this is how COVID works, those sulfhydryl groups attach onto one of your cells, and they can get inside that cell, for example, in your lungs, and they sort of glue themselves in there. Now, that allows the virus itself, that ball, to duplicate itself. And as it duplicates, it builds up, and the body has to react to that. And it reacted by forming these compounds called cytokines. And now suddenly, like a jack in the box, boom. After so many days, the cytokines would be suddenly released. They call it a cytokine storm. And that's what actually killed people from COVID. Okay. Now, what ozone has an ability to do is steal an electron and attach and grab onto those double bonds. Now, what that does, it weakens, obviously, the ability of the virus to get into a cell and glue itself in. But it also punches a hole in that outer protective layer then of the virus, and it allows ozone to get inside the virus. That the RNA, and that what it does then is it inactivates the virus. So what actually happens is the virus can't duplicate itself. Since it can't duplicate itself, it goes through a life cycle like every organism, and it dies without producing offspring. So it can't keep reproducing more and more virus cells, which causes that cytokine storm to eventually build up and kill us. Now, it's also been proven, by the way, one other thing, this is not new. The research on that, just so you should know, goes way back into the 1980s, when it was shown that that's how ozone works against the polio virus, that it can activate the polio virus and actually stop polio. And that's how it works on Ebola, because I'm published on that. I'm published on COVID. It basically stops viruses from regrowing itself. They die off, and that's how you're able to get rid of viruses in the body with ozone injected.
I've heard that the bad guys in the body, the pathogens, really need to have an anaerobic environment. In other words, an environment that doesn't have oxygen. And when we introduce oxygen to the environment of these germs, that they are unhappy and don't work properly.
Well, not only those, but cancer cells as well. I was speaking to a patient today, and I was telling them what cancer really is, and this is what people don't understand. Cancer doesn't have a brain. Okay, for example, a liver cell becomes cancerous. Now, what happened? And Dr. Otto Warburg got a Nobel Prize for this in 1931. Those organelles, those mitochondria that produce those energy molecules that I spoke about, have become damaged. Now, what damages them? Just quickly, artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, radiation, all sorts of things can damage those mitochondria. So now the cell cannot produce energy a normal way using oxygen. Okay, so now it has to find another way to produce energy, and it uses a completely different pathway. It goes from what we call the Krebs cycle to the Ebden-Meyerhof pathway. Well, what that really basically means is it just uses sugar to produce energy without oxygen. So the cell has now forgotten that it's a liver cell or a pancreas cell or a brain cell. It now has forgotten what kind of cell it really is. And because it cannot produce enough energy to do those three things that I said earlier, what can it do? It produces enough energy to stay alive and make another one. That's all it can do. And
Using
that's how
sugar,
cancer grows.
right?
So it just makes more and more of itself because it doesn't have another purpose. It doesn't know that it has to be a brain cell or a heart cell or a liver cell. It just makes more of itself because it can't do anything else. And that's
Stupidly.
what cancer is.
Yeah,
Ozone goes in and destroys cancer because cancer cells can't produce those antioxidant enzymes to protect itself against oxidation.
uh-huh.
Aha. And that's why ozone has been used for over a century with dozens of papers, published studies showing its benefits against cancer in the body. In fact, against all harmful organisms in the body.
Right, but in your practice in New York, um, you don't want to make claims about what you're doing for people's particular diseases, because certainly the authorities, don't want you to compete with the pharmaceutical companies.
Well, Big Pharma runs the world, as we know in medicine. They control a lot of how medicine is practiced and what you can and what you can't do, along with insurance companies and lawyers. Medicine has been harmed greatly by all this over the years. But fact is, ozone has been used to treat multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Lyme disease, herpes, HSV 1 and 2, herpes, Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, all sorts of dermatological problems and eye problems. I mean, the list is enormous. On what ozone has been used to treat worldwide for literally over a century now, effectively, and more doctors. And that's the good news, because I'm training a couple of doctors this week. You'll probably meet them when you come in from Toronto. And more doctors every year are learning about ozone therapy. And literally, it's now being used in well over 60 countries by over 75,000 physicians and clinics worldwide. Now, when patients go, well, let me ask my doctor about this. There's only one answer their doctor should give them. Gee, I don't know, because that's the truth. Because unless you have a deep academic knowledge of something or a deep clinical experience, what else could you say? Doctors are afraid to say they don't know something. Those words, I don't know, I use all the time. Most doctors are afraid to use. And now if they say to a patient, this sounds like might really be beneficial for you, I think you should do it. They don't know. They have no right to say that. Or if they go the opposite and go, oh, this sounds dangerous to me, I don't think you should do it. Once again, they have no idea because they don't have any academic knowledge or clinical experience. And then they barely have read one medical journal that month, let alone one of the 15,000 plus medical journals that are out there worldwide every month. If you go and Google that, you'll find out it's a huge number. So they don't know that there's hundreds of studies that have been published on its medical uses worldwide for the last 75 years. And if anybody goes to pubmed.gov, our National Library of Medicine, the NIH Library of Medicine, and you put in intravenous in search, oh my God, you'll be blown away. There's, on any given moment in time, over 100 plus research papers that have been published worldwide. And if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you'll even type in intravenous ozone therapy. You'll even see those that there are clinical trials that are currently being done or that have already been completed successfully, showing its benefits. So this is well studied, but if you don't know, you don't know. And you got to go looking for it to find it.
So we're getting near the end of the show, and I know that we talked earlier because we did a show recently about probiotics and how important they are, and a good product called Doctor's Biome that you're responsible for. And so how does that work with ozone? And also we want to tell people how to get a good discount on probiotics.
Okay, so first of all, two things. Ozone kills all bacteria, harmful bacteria and good bacteria, because bacteria cannot protect themselves against it. They can't make those antioxidant enzymes. So ozone kills all probiotics but not instantly like antibiotics do. That's why we're able to help all sorts of digestive diseases and disorders. Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, ileitis, duodenitis, irritable bowel, leaky gut, C. difficile. All these horrible digestive diseases and disorders are helped with ozone therapy. On the other hand, you have to put the good boys back in. And that's why that show that we did on microbiome on probiotics was so important. And what we found out is that unless you're drinking a living liquid probiotic, meaning capsule powders and tablets, as you learned on that show, they are 90+% destroyed in the stomach. So you need bacteria biome that can actually survive the acids of the stomach and stick to the wall of your gut. And that's why that doctor's biome became so important. If they listen to that show of yours, if they can tune it in, they'll learn about it. Well, you forgot to give them, because you asked for it, the company gave you a coupon code. Okay. And with that coupon code, they can get 10% off the retail price. And if they go on auto ship, which they can cancel anytime, they can get an additional 10% off. So they could save 20% off, probably one of the most important supplements they can possibly take every day. So if they were to use the code Peter30, they'll get that 10% off. And so you had another coupon code. So there's a good chance we can, and I'll find out if we can't either keep two coupon codes for you or tell all your other listeners who are using that other coupon code, go to Peter30 now, and this way they'll get that discount.
People can email me at peter@heartriver.org for clarification if they need that.
Sure, tell them. So once again, Peter30 is their coupon code to get that discount. And I'm sure the company will be able to make that change.
Now let's tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yes, you can call my office in Manhattan at 212-581-0101. That's 212-581-0101, or email me at ozonedoctor, OZONE, @yahoo.com. OzoneDoctor@yahoo.com.
Dr. Howard Robins, thanks so much for being a guest on Energy Stew again. It's so great to talk with you.
Thank you, Peter, for having me. I love being had by you.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.live. And again, I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.